Hi, I'm a former higher ed CMO and I have a confession to make. I am actually thinking that if you are a chief marketing officer, a vice president, a chief enrollment officer, and you are not deliberately and intentionally embedding the use of artificial intelligence into the work that you're doing, I think that you are going to see yourself fall dramatically behind. And so, having my guest today talk about the work that she's doing, I hope will inspire you to start thinking about what you can be doing if you haven't already. Abbigail Tumpey is the Vice President for Institute Communications at Georgia Institute of Technology, where she leads the marketing and communications strategy. Prior to joining Virginia Tech, Abbigail spent 25 years at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and had 21 of those years in senior communication leadership roles, overseeing the agency's communications efforts during the COVID-19 emergency response. I'm so excited to have her on the show. I hope you enjoy.
I actually think if there are marketing and communications teams in higher ed right now who are not using AI, they are probably 2 years behind. Now, the good news is that if they start now, they could actually catch up. And
Mhm.
if you get them motivated enough, they could potentially leapfrog some of their peers.
You're listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jaime Hunt, your source for insight and inspiration on the issues shaping higher ed marketing. From AI and branding to enrollment strategy and leadership, each episode explores the ideas, challenges, and opportunities facing today's marketing leaders. Let's get into it. Hey, Abbigail, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so thrilled about this conversation. I met Abbigail at the PRSA Counselors to Higher Education Senior Summit in March. And she was on a panel talking about her team's usage of AI. And some of the stuff that she's doing, I thought, is really innovative and immediately knew I had to share it with my audience. And so I'm just so excited about this conversation. And I would love to start by hearing, like, you just shared with me offline how this whole AI initiative got started, but can you fill in the audience on that?
Yeah, I would love to. So I actually joined Georgia Tech about 3 years ago now. I spent 25 years at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And when I came to Georgia Tech, I knew that Georgia Tech was very much involved in AI. I mean, we were the top producer in the country of AI talent. But very shortly after getting here, President Cabrera actually had all of the senior leadership team in a retreat, and he was talking about our needing to adapt to the whole transformation of what's happening with regards to AI in our society. And his basic message was Georgia Tech was behind the creating the science that helped lead to what we know as generative AI today. And because of that, if you're going to be a leader at Georgia Tech, you really should be embracing AI in everything you do. Now, I should tell you up front, like we're going to sit here and talk about AI. And so you're probably going to think I'm just like this person who's regularly adapting to technology. I should confess to you, because this is a confession podcast, right? So I should confess to you that I am a late adopter to technology. I'm such a late adopter to technology that I literally had an Android phone until the day before I came to work at Georgia Tech. And the only reason I got rid of my Android phone was I thought that I would come to Georgia Tech and everybody would make fun of me. So RIP, RIP my Android phone. I got here and really started trying to absorb as much as I could on AI, how much is shifting. I like binge podcasts in the evenings and weekends and read as much as I can online in order to really kind of stay up and really kind of meet the expectation of really this role. So over the course of the last 3 years, our department has been working really hard to kind of like think about how we're using AI. Now, I, for 3 years, have had an AI goal, and we've done several things which we can talk about to kind of increase adoption of AI across our department. But overall, just like any kind of diffusion of technology in a group, sometimes that's a little bit slow. So we certainly have had our kind of early adopters who are doing some really cool stuff. You kind of have that movable middle, and then you have people who are not necessarily trying it yet. The big pivot we've made this year is that everyone in our department in Institute Communications at Georgia Tech is going to have an AI goal. And so some of the things that came out from that are super exciting. And so I'm excited to talk to you about some of our learnings.
I really love this. I travel around the country giving AI trainings to campuses, and I find that unless you have this really intentional perspective from the president's level and it's coming down from the cabinet into the teams, it gets this adoption that's very sort of bell curve shaped, where you have the people who are like, I'm all in from day one, and they've probably built their first GPT the day that that was available to them. And then you have a bunch of people kind of sitting with their arms crossed saying, I'm not touching it, I'll never touch it. And so I just love the intentionality and the like, if you're going to work here, we helped develop this technology. You need to be figuring out how to leverage it. And I love that. And when you talked at PRSHE, you spoke about the Georgia Tech Audience Lab.
Mhm.
And I am dying to hear more about that. And I'm sure listeners would be too.
Yeah, so I really should start by actually giving credit to our colleagues at USC in Southern California. They actually initially created a model of an audience lab. And so about a year plus ago, we're all part of AAU, which is basically an organization that represents the R1 universities. And Megan, who leads communications out there, she presented on this audience, this what she was calling synthetic audiences. And she actually created a set of synthetic audiences when they were launching their DC office to really kind of get feedback on, what policymakers would think about them having a DC office and what that would look like. But in doing so, she presented kind of a roadmap of, if you were to do this, here's how you would, potentially build it. So we took that back from the conference. It came back to Georgia Tech. We had a member of our team, Ian Webb, who is just incredibly savvy on AI, and we kind of gave the presentation to him. And he, within a matter of days, not kidding, he had Georgia Tech Audience Lab prototype up and running. Now, we've actually built our audience lab a little bit different than our colleagues in California. So, our Georgia Tech Audience Lab has a bunch of different audience segments. And basically, what this is the GPT. So, if you haven't worked with AI before, creating a GPT or an agent or a project or an instruction set is actually surprisingly easy, right?
Mhm.
And in a situation like this, you can really continue to modify and tinker with it in order for it to really to build it in a way that makes sense for you. So for us, we knew we were going to have a lot of different audience segments that we were going to want to get feedback from. And we had a lot of available data. We had data on prospective students. We had data on our staff. We had data on our current students. We have data on alumni. We have data on donors. We have data on the state legislature, the Georgia state legislature. That's publicly available information of who is in the state legislature and how they vote and many of their thoughts. Basically, Ian took this, he created a whole series of, as you would say, personas, right? A whole series of kind of uh, different audience segments. And the way this works is that you can actually use the audience lab and get feedback and put together a focus group. Now, we actually wanted our audience lab to be rooted in science. And so one of the things I asked Ian to do in building it was to actually, I wanted a mix of qualitative and quantitative data. And so we actually came up with a measurement that it basically uses advertising theory, and we came up with our own kind of metric to measure not only the content, but also how the content is visually laid out. Now, we adapted it to what works for us. And at some point in time in the future, I hope that Ian will publish this and will make this widely available and people can adapt it, to their needs. But we did it based on what we need from a Georgia Tech perspective. So imagine, for example, this Georgia Tech Audience Lab. Let's say that you're in one of our colleges. Let's just take College of Engineering. So you're a communications person in College of Engineering. You can access the Georgia Tech Audience Lab, and it looks just like ChatGPT, where you could put in a website and say, run a focus group on with prospective students and give me feedback on this particular page. And it would know your prospective students and be able to give you feedback on that. It would give you a score. So you would have qualitative and quantitative data coming out. And then you could basically give a prompt and say, help me rewrite this web page based on this feedback. And it will rewrite the web page and give you even code layout for what this would look like as a redesigned web page. So we're in the process right now. We've been using it in Institute Communications for several things, which I'll give you a couple examples of. But we're in the process right now. We've teamed up with our liberal arts college where we're actually testing it with a graduate research assistant. And our hope is to actually roll it out to campus. So anyone in campus by summertime will be able to access it and they can run their own focus groups. So let's say you're in College of Design and you want to create a new pamphlet for donors. You could easily do that. We just recently used Georgia Tech Audience Lab to rethink how we were telling our story on our impact on research. So this last year, across the country, higher ed, there were a lot of questions on federally funded research, and we're number 2 in the country for federally funded research. And many other institutions across the country started doing campaigns that were very focused on higher ed. The images were people working in a lab, a researcher, and telling the story of that individual researcher. What we found in our Georgia Tech Audience Lab was that a lot of the Georgia legislature, they really wanted to see something that was more tangible. And so we took some of that feedback and we tested a whole bunch of campaign concepts. And the one campaign concept that had bipartisan support from our synthetic Georgia legislature in our Georgia Tech Audience Lab was this concept of research for real life. And really showing, instead of showing a Georgia Tech person, show a person who it might be for example, farmer in a field who was impacted by Georgia Tech research and how that research helped them. We have an example of a child who has cerebral palsy and is getting to do work with Georgia Tech's exoskeleton lab. We probably would have gotten to that point at some point in time in the future, but I think the fact that we could easily take this Georgia Tech Audience Lab and test some messaging and really think about what do these audiences care about and get that really concrete feedback, it helped us get there quicker.
I absolutely love this. I think the first person I heard talking about building out audience persona GPTs was Brian Piper. And I've heard a couple other folks using it. I've never heard anybody using it at the legislative level and getting like that buy-in. I think everybody I've heard talk about it is using it for, prospective students or prospective graduate students. And there's so many things that you just said that I want to follow up on. But one of the things that I definitely want to lean into is the first time this happened, you did this and you got these results. Like what surprised you most? For me, it would almost be like, I'm surprised it worked. Like that's amazing that this did what we were expecting it to do. Because like you said, like the barrier to creating a GPT is so, I'm not a technical person, but I can build one. Like what surprised you about it?
I think the realization that we could give communicators across Georgia Tech a tool that would help them do their job, quicker, make their job easier. It would make their job more rooted in a, kind of a science, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that part I think is really exciting to me. Coming from the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, we would do human focus groups all the time, right? So you roll out a new fill in the blank flu vaccine, any vaccine, right? You would spend a lot of energy and time and money going around the country and getting feedback from humans and then sit there and like methodically refine every single word of the campaign materials, right? And the fact that we could do this, get that feedback really quickly, base it in data that we know is accurate, right? And then be able to kind of turn around some updated communication content. It was just incredibly exciting. I will say too, one of the things, speaking of kind of the human aspect of this, so we actually, at the same time, we're actually doing some usability tests with actual students, with actual humans, right, on our Georgia Tech website as we were building the Georgia Tech Audience Lab. And so we were able to compare those actual human feedback to the feedback we were getting from the AI Georgia Tech Audience Lab. And there's a lot of similarity. I mean, it was 80 to 90%, right? Across the
Wow.
board, similar. And so one of the pieces we're doing with the graduate research assistant right now is to do also that human and AI comparison. And so even if it doesn't get you 100%, if it gets you 80 to 90%, that's super exciting, right? And that allows you then to say, okay, we think we need to go in this direction. Now let's go take this concept and let's run this whole concept, even the example of the campaign. Let's go run the research for real life campaign through some actual state legislators and get their feedback. But then you don't have to spend so much time and energy, and you're hitting it kind of closer to the mark right off the bat. That's pretty exciting.
Well, and a lot of teams are under resourced and they just don't even have time to do a focus group if they wanted to.
Right.
I'm currently an interim CMO, and my team is 3 people. Like there's no focus groups happening, and to have a tool that gets you 80% there, honestly, if it got us 70% there, that is 70 to 80% that we wouldn't be able to get to with our staffing ever. And I just think it's so amazing that we have these tools out there that can make us better at our jobs. But I think there's this bad rap that generative AI is for generating really bad copy about the ever evolving landscape and, all of those sort of bad copy examples. And I don't know that people are always thinking through some of these other use cases. And I would love to hear from you about what some of the other use cases on your team when they each have an AI goal. What does some other use cases look like?
Yeah. So we have actually spent quite a bit of time getting people comfortable with the tools, right? And getting people increasing their confidence in their ability to everything from creating initial prompts and what does that look like. We started doing that, 2.5 years ago, to just recently, I spent an entire hour plus with a broad group of my leadership team, all of my directors and my AVPs, and we all sat and just shared stories on how we're using different AI tools. And in that, walked through how do you create an instruction set? How do you create an agent? How do you create a GPT? And we did that in advance of us walking into let's go create goals. So, what it resulted in is because people got exposed to, oh, I could potentially make an agent to do XYZ. And we even ran people through a scenario that was you go, open any chatbot that you want. And you all can do this as you're listening, right? Open a chatbot and type in I am a, let's just say, fractional CMO at XYZ University. Here's the scenario. How would I potentially use AI for my job? And help me think of 5 different agents or GPTs that would help me do my job better. And you could even put in the prompt an example of I spend a lot of time doing XYZ, whatever is your
Mhm.
major kind of time suck. And the chatbot can come back to you and give you some concrete information of ideas of what you could do. So we did that in advance of people walking into the goals. And what was amazing to me was like some of the ideas that came out in the goals are just incredible. So right off the bat, I have a member of our team who's already created an agent that's an editor agent. And basically it runs through a series of things. So let's say, you're in one of our colleges. Let's just take one of our smaller colleges, like College of Design. There might only be 1 or 2 editors in that college, right? Or writers. So they might not have time to have an extra person have a set of eyes on all of their stuff. So having an editor agent would be exceptionally helpful. This particular
Mhm.
agent that we initially prototype, it runs through AP style, it runs through the Georgia Tech style guide, it has our brand, voice, and tone. It matches faculty names to, our actual faculty list and website. And then it comes back to you and says, do you want to make SEO words? Do you want to do all those other little things when you're putting a story out that you have to think about? Oh, let me
Mhm.
put the title for the newsletter. Let me do this, right? It prompts you with these questions. When it makes any edits, it's also telling you, here's the edits I'm making so that people can learn from that. So that's one example, editor agent. We recently we're using it for a lot of like kind of HR related things. Okay. So, for example, all of our job descriptions were kind of all over the place. There was not really a good, consistent frame for all of our job descriptions across Georgia Tech, and we didn't have a good ladder system. So we teamed up with our Georgia Tech Human Resources office, and I basically built a project that helped us rewrite the 100 job descriptions across the entire institute and come up with a career ladder matrix. And
Nice.
we were able to do it, whereas this project may have taken us, back in the day when we didn't have AI chatbots, this project might have taken us months to rewrite all those
Mhm.
job descriptions. Now we not only had them in a shorter amount of time, but we also had other things that were helpful. So comparing and contrasting between positions, roles, and responsibilities. We created, what is the difference between one job going up to the next one, and what are the training aspects and the skills that a person would need in that. And all of this, obviously, we as humans could sit down and write and do, but that takes a lot of time. And there's a
Yeah.
lot to these CMO higher ed jobs. And so this just kind of helps us do our job more quickly. Across the board, there's a fair amount of automation that people are doing. There's a fair amount of using it for things like events, checklists. We're creating an
Mm.
agent for that. I'm personally like to use AI at moments when it kind of helps me. I like to say, kind of help me be a better person. So, a great example of that is
Mm.
when I first came to Georgia Tech, I got feedback from employees that we really needed to rethink our employee recognition programs across our communications network. And so I sat in several listening sessions with employees, and I pulled together kind of a council to give me some advice, and I took notes from that. And was able to take all of those notes, consolidate them, put it into AI, take all that feedback, turn out a plan for how we were actually going to think about employee recognition, and then a survey to get feedback on the plan, and an email to the department to ask them to take the survey to give us feedback on the plan, right? So within like 20 minutes in between meetings, I was able to do something that years ago I probably would have spent, quite a bit of time on a weekend or
Mhm.
evening really thinking about, what do I want to do with employee recognition. But this was able to take all of that qualitative feedback and help me really think about, how do I do something that is really meaningful to our employees so that they want to show up every day at Georgia Tech, right? And so those are the ways that as a leader, I'm using AI to kind of help me go further and be able to,
Mhm.
stretch myself a little bit further so that I can be the best leader I can for my department.
Let's take a quick break to talk about something big happening this summer, Engage Summit 2026. The next era of higher ed isn't about adding more tools, it's about building an agentic campus where AI works alongside your teams to recruit smarter, support students faster, and scale impact without burning people out. From real world examples of agentic systems in action to hands on sessions that show how AI can coordinate enrollment, marketing, advising, and operations, Engage Summit 2026 is where institutions move from experimentation to execution. If you're ready to design a campus where AI doesn't just assist, but instead acts, learns, and drives outcomes, then you want to be in Charlotte June 15th through the 17th. But it gets even better. As an Enrollify listener, you can grab your ticket for half off. Just head to engage.summit shop.element451.com and use code HUNT50 to apply the 50% off discount. That's HUNT50. Okay, let's get back to the conversation. I adore that. I had kind of a debate, a friendly debate with a friend of mine who said, I'm too busy to figure out how to use these tools. And I said, once I started using AI, and it was like, it came out in November 20, ChatGPT came out in November 2022, and I was using it by January. The amount of hours I worked on evenings and weekends just plummeted because you would be able to squeeze in writing a job description between two meetings. You'd be able to squeeze in putting together an agenda for a retreat between two meetings instead of my thinking time was always in the evenings and on weekends. And it just reduced it so much. And I thought, if you take a little bit of time to learn how you can leverage these, you will suddenly have more time than you think to once you're able, and you're going to be able to do so much cooler stuff. To your point, like these are things that when I was at Miami, we had a task force that was working on the job description and career progression project, and I think it took them like 6 or 8 months to come back to me with a proposal and a well fleshed out plan. And to your point, 20 minutes to do that work is amazing. I just think that people are thinking of it as having the level of power it has. It isn't a great content creator. I
No,
don't think
totally
it
agree.
is.
It is not. Right. Yeah.
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 It's a great brainstormer. It's a great idea generator. It's so good for that stuff. I'm curious, what platform are you using, or is that up to the employee?
So when we did the AI goals, we allowed employees to pick what they wanted to use. And so, obviously our graphics designers and our videographers and others are going to pick different platforms and maybe our writers, right? But right now, what we have available is ChatGPT, Copilot, obviously Perplexity, Gemini, soon to have Notebook LM. So, and then, we have other smaller tools that are integrated into some of our other systems as well.
I tell people all the time, like, don't just think about it as one tool is all you need, because there's strengths and weaknesses across them all. And so I love that you've opened that up. There's so many times when I do a training and it's like, oh, we're only allowed to use X or Y on our campus. And it's like, that's so frustrating when you know that Claude or Gemini would be able to do this task much better, but you can't for some sort of arbitrary reason in a lot of cases. When you brought this idea of like everybody needs to have an AI goal, how did your team react to that?
It was mixed reviews, just to be transparent. It was mixed reviews. Definitely it was exactly what you said you would expect from the bell-shaped curve, right? There were people who were
Mhm.
excited, like, yes, finally, they had been using AI, but not really talking about the examples that they were
Mm.
doing necessarily. There's kind of, several of our staff who are, wanted to just kind of have the door open, had lots of ideas, but weren't quite sure if they really should be jumping in. And there definitely are some staff that are still thinking through how they're going to implement it. And I think, but overall, I have been amazed by the interest and the excitement. There were several people who took on AI goals that were so kind of visionary that they were not sure how they were going to accomplish it. And that
Mm.
was the most exciting part to me. So,
Mhm.
for example, several of my AVPs, their goals, when they came to me with their goals, they said, I think that AI could help me do XYZ, and this is the vision. And I don't really know how I'm going to accomplish this, but I want to have space to try this vision. Right. And so that part was the most exciting to me, of like an individual who is just like, thinking that level outside the box. I think, you're kind of alluding to earlier a little bit about the human in the loop part of it, right? And I think the most important human characteristic you have to have when you're working with any AI tool is a level of curiosity and a level of wonder of like, I
Mhm.
wonder if I could do XYZ with AI. I wonder if it could solve this problem for me. And that's pretty fun to have
Mhm.
to sit with that level of wonder and try to kind of break down a problem, define a problem, think through all the steps of the problem, and then think about how AI could help you with that. And then you need the kind of human aspect of like looking at the solution that AI comes back with and say, is this working or not? Is this actually a
Mhm.
good GPT? Is this actually giving me good feedback? And so you need that kind of critical thinking skill in addition to the wonder of really thinking about solving a lot of these problems.
So Agnes Scott is rolling out a universal AI curriculum, and one of the ways that we're talking about it is in that lens of it's I'm going to sound like a GPT now. It's about more than just learning how to use the tools. It's learning how they work, how you could leverage them, um, what is the ethics behind it, like having this critical thinking. How do you know if it's a good output or a terrible output, all of that. And I think that the first way of just learning how to use a tool, that becomes obsolete over time, sometimes
Yes.
over not much time. Sometimes every time I do these workshops, even if it's been 2 weeks, I have to redo chunks of it. But at the same time, if you're learning this and apply a critical thinking lens to it, you're you're going to be able to grow and adapt with the tool as it changes, I think, a little bit more easily, because you're not as much focused on the buttons that you're pushing, but the inputs and outputs that you're putting in and taking out of it.
100%. And this entire field is moving so fast. So before we started the podcast, you and I were talking about I was on vacation last week and I was on spring break. And one of my AVPs, Louisa Russo, who has been one of my early adopters to AI, and she oversees our marketing and communications and much of our digital work. And she's really been doing quite a lot to try to move the department along in our AI adoption. One of the things she said to me, because she was out on vacation too last week, she said, "Oh my gosh, we absolutely have to talk about the fact that AI has moved so much in the week we were gone."
Right?
The
Right?
fact that that was like the top of her one-on-one agenda of all the things that happened in the field of AI last week that we need to somehow keep up on, shows you that this is moving really quickly.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your perspective on this. I've had this debate with a fellow higher ed marketer as well, that this person feels like it's going to be too late pretty soon to get on board with using these tools. I'm going to not say what my position is yet, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, do you think there's still time to get and engage a team and be leveraging it in these really sophisticated ways?
I actually think if there are marketing and communications teams in higher ed right now who are not using AI, they are probably 2 years behind. Now, the good news is that if they start now, they could actually catch up. And
Mhm.
if you get them motivated enough, they could potentially leapfrog some of their peers. But you really would need to get them motivated on adapting to it very rapidly. I think that's what made me so excited with the energy of our department around the AI goals is the amount of ideas, the fact that we were like, use any tool. If you don't have access to the tool, we will get you access to the tool. Like think outside the box, do something that's going to help you do your job better or is going to make an impact for the institute, right? And those were the parameters basically. The fact that we came with our team came back with such a level of creativity on some of these goals makes me excited about where we're going to be in a year and what
Yeah.
what this group is potentially going to be able to do in a year.
Yeah, I mean, so I quit my job 2 years ago, and I remember at that time feeling like having AI, be part of your team's work would swiftly become a differentiator, because you would be able to accomplish so much more, or things at a higher scale, or things at a higher level of sophistication, if you were leveraging AI. And I feel like that gap is going to grow. I mean, look at what you're able to do that other folks that aren't leveraging these tools can't do at all, or it takes so much man hours to do that they just don't. And that is going to start to separate the pack over time. Like, we're at a point where the pack is still relatively tight,
Yep.
but like that the folks like you are going to be pulling ahead of everyone else and going faster and faster and faster. And like the other folks that are not even touching it at all are going to fall so far behind.
Yep. I totally agree.
So I'm curious, and in your process of you've been doing this for a while, surely you've had to hire folks in that time. Are there specific skill sets or specific things that you're looking for when you hire now, to make sure that they're able to kind of fit into this culture?
I think we want people who are going to think outside the box, who are going to be willing to adapt to the technology, and who are going to show up with that sense of kind of curiosity and wonder, right?
Yeah.
Those are really the traits I think that are going to be critical for us as humans to continue to bring to the job market. And anyone who is using AI tools at a, even moderately sophisticated rate. But if you got yourself to a really high level of efficiency with many of these AI tools, and a high level of competence, that's just going to open doors. So this
Mhm.
is also when I first went to President Cabrera and I said, I hear you on AI, and so my goal this year is I'm actually going to get my entire department to have goals. I've had a goal for 3 years now, but I really need to accelerate where the department is going. And his first reaction to it was, they're so lucky. And I was like, I'm not sure they would use the word lucky. Why would you say the word lucky? And he said, you're preparing them for the way society is right now. And at some point in time in the future, when they're looking for, jobs, even potentially outside of Georgia Tech, they are going to be, much more ready for the current job market of being able
Mhm.
to adapt to what's happening right now.
You've heard this phrase that you're not going to be replaced by AI, you're going to be replaced by people who know how to use AI. I have run into the first person that I know of that is in that situation. So it's a friend who was interviewing with another friend. It was these circles overlapping. And the friend that was doing the interviewing said, "Yeah, this person said they're not really using AI. I need someone who understands how to use AI. That's why I didn't hire your friend." And I just thought, this is the first case I've seen where somebody has lost a job opportunity because they didn't know AI. And you're right, your team is really lucky that they're out on the ground floor finding ways to leverage this. And I want to acknowledge that you've clearly created an environment where innovation is possible, that people are able to try and fail and learn from the failure and try new things. Like, what about that whole innovation process do you feel like you can contribute to making sure that your employees feel like they can do those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think having that open, transparent culture, and I think letting people know that we are going to fail,
Hmm.
and that's going to be okay. There's going to be times where we're not really going to completely get it right. And that's what's going to be, the learnings out of this is there's going to, I think, I gave the example of Ian Webb creating the Georgia Tech Audience Lab. I think he created maybe a dozen versions before he finally showed me.
Oh, I
I think
believe it.
since then he's probably done a dozen more versions, right? Like he had to really iterate multiple times
Hmm.
to really make sure that he was getting what he needed. And certainly every time I'm creating a project or creating an agent or even an instruction set, it doesn't work right away, right? So
Hmm.
just letting people know that you're failing too and you're finding the flaws. I do want to go back to the piece too that you mentioned about the writing. there's so many groups that are attempting to use it for writing. And I will say these current LLMs are not great writers, right? Like, I think that they are, there's certain things that they have a tendency of doing. The one that always drives me nuts is the situation of it's not this but this, rather this
Yeah.
than this, and
Yes.
these comparisons, right? But I think to your point is making sure that humans are working with AI enough to be savvy enough to know, hey, I need to go back
Mhm.
and re-edit that. I need to take out
Yes.
M dashes and I need to make sure that
Right.
it's really in the brand voice and tone and all of that. I will also say one point that I want to make sure that I get into this, which is I don't want people to immediately after listening to this go to the Georgia Tech website and think, oh, the whole thing is AI. Every single thing that our department is putting out is reviewed by a human. Everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
Social media, a media pitch, everything on the website, we have fully human in the loop. So the ways that we're using it is not to let's just write the whole thing, right? We're using it in much higher level kind of
Mhm.
strategy or efficiency ways in order to improve how we're functioning as a group.
I think it's really important to stress that human in the loop piece. And honestly, I was talking to my husband about this on a walk this morning. I love working with AI on projects and going back and forth and being like, that's not quite what I was thinking. Like, what if we thought about this in this way? Or what if we thought about it through this lens? And it feels like I'm working with a person sometimes. Like, I've removed all the sycophancy. It's like, just get to the point. Don't tell me how smart I am. I don't need to hear that. But I love that. I tell people I sometimes feel like I'm a jockey. There's this really powerful racehorse, and I am steering it and riding it and getting it encouraged to run and whatever. And it would still run that race if I wasn't doing that, but it might not finish well. It might not cross the finish line. It might buck me off and run away. And so getting really experienced at being able to jockey I think is such a critical skill right now.
I totally agree. I think when looking at these tools, you use them all differently and they have different
Mhm.
pros and cons. So I might use ChatGPT for something and I might use Copilot for something completely different. And I think having the knowledge base of thinking about how do you go back and forth with some of these tools to get what you want. And once you get to
Mhm.
a certain, level of savviness with many of these current AI tools, then you can actually know, oh, these are the ones I'm going to select for this particular project because you know that type of output that you're potentially going to get.
Like, they just have such different strengths and weaknesses, and understanding where one might be helpful in one way. And there's things where I do some parts of something in this tool and some parts in that tool and piece it all together. And I just think that that takes a lot of expertise in how to use the tool, but then you can't grab somebody off the street and be like, use AI to write a marketing plan. Like, that's not
Right.
how it works. there there has to be human expertise in there. Is there a red line for you? Something that you will never use AI for?
So I'm pretty old fashioned and I love handwritten notes.
Mhm.
I If you get an email or a handwritten note from me, I have not used AI. And
Mhm.
I think when you are showing up as a leader, you should show up as your true authentic self. And so I'm not using AI for emails or other personal correspondence. I'm writing those from my heart as how, sharing the information I want to share with my colleagues. There's probably other examples, including, obviously staying away from using AI for anything that requires personal information, et cetera, right? All the
Right.
typical kind of guardrails. But I think for the most part, us really creating systems where we're making sure that humans are in the loop through that whole process makes it so that we automatically have some of those guardrails in place.
So my second to last question for you is what do you think will separate the teams that thrive in this era of AI and those that fall behind?
I think it's really that sense of being open to embrace the technology, being willing to fail, being willing to try new things. And again, that sense of wonder and curiosity.
I love that. I love that I hear a lot of people talk about the curiosity, but I love that you add wonder into that because that just seems to add this like very positive and beautiful outlook on things. Like it's a very glass half full mentality about it. I adore that. So my last question I ask all my guests this is what is your higher ed marketing hottest take? And it doesn't have to be related to AI. Just what is your higher ed marketing hottest take?
Well, I think earlier we were talking about what if you are not using AI right now? And I made the comment that potentially you're 2 years behind. But I would say my hottest take really is start now. Start now in any form or fashion. Stop this podcast, open up any chatbot of your choosing and start having a conversation about what your role is and start asking questions. How could I potentially use AI? How could AI help me with my job? What are some agents and GPTs and instructions that would help me save time? And I think that you would very quickly start to realize examples of ways that you could start incorporating AI into everything that you're doing as a leader.
I love that a lot. If people want to chat with you, where can they find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to chat about AI at any point in time or any other topic in the higher ed space.
And listeners, as always, you know you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, Jaime, or you can find me on my website at solvehighered.com. And you can find my book at heartoverhypebook.com. Abbigail, thank you so much for coming on the show. And listeners, as always, let's go bust some silos. Listeners, can I ask you a quick favor? If you enjoy this show, take a moment to give it a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm a type A eldest daughter, so positive feedback is basically my love language. I also genuinely love hearing from listeners. You can find me at LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt. That's JaimeHunt. And yes, I am named after the Bionic Woman. You can also find me at solvehighered.com. Say hello, share a thought, pitch an idea. Don't be shy. I genuinely love hearing from you.